"You know this baby doesn't look like my son at all," Margaret whispered loud enough for the entire baptism reception to hear, her voice dripping with disdain as she stared at my 3-month-old daughter sleeping in my arms. "I mean, look at those features. Are we sure about the father?" The church hall fell silent. Every eye turned to me. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but instead of crying or screaming like she expected, I smiled. I gently adjusted Emma's blanket and looked Margaret straight in the eye. "You know what, Margaret? You're absolutely right to question genetics. In fact, I think it's time we all got some answers about family bloodlines." What my mother-in-law didn't know was that I'd been a genealogist for 8 years, and the envelope in my purse contained DNA results that would destroy her world. "My name is Sarah Chin Williams, and at 34, I run the most successful genealogy consulting firm in Portland, Oregon. For the past 8 years, I've helped families uncover their histories, solve mysteries, and yes, sometimes discover secrets that people desperately wanted to keep buried. I have degrees in genetics and anthropology, I'm certified in forensic genealogy, and I've worked with law enforcement on cold cases." But standing in that church hall, watching my husband David's face turn red with embarrassment while his mother publicly humiliated me, I realized that all my professional expertise was about to become very, very personal. Margaret Williams had made my life hell from the moment David introduced us 6 years ago. She was one of those women who believed her son could do no wrong and that no woman would ever be good enough for him. The fact that I was half Chinese made it worse. She never said it outright, but the microaggressions were constant. Comments about Emma's unusual features. Questions about whether I was really American. Jokes about mixed babies looking confused. But what Margaret didn't understand was that I don't get mad. I get methodical. And I'd been planning this moment for 3 months. See, the thing about being a genealogist is that you learn to dig. You learn to follow paper trails, to connect dots that other people miss, and to uncover truths that families spend generations trying to hide. And when someone repeatedly attacks your child's legitimacy, well, you start to wonder what skeletons might be rattling around in their own family closet. It all started the day Emma was born. I'll never forget lying in that hospital bed, exhausted but blissful, when Margaret walked in and the first words out of her mouth weren't congratulations. They were, "Well, she certainly doesn't look like a Williams." Not hello. Not how are you feeling. Just immediate doubt about my daughter's paternity. David had tried to defend me, but Margaret had a way of planting seeds of doubt that grew like weeds. Over the next 3 months, the comments escalated. At Emma's first doctor's appointment, "Are you sure about those eye measurements? Williams babies have always had blue eyes." At the grocery store, someone asked if I was babysitting because Emma looks nothing like our family. At family dinners, "You know, David, maybe you should have waited to get married." There are so many unknowns when you rush into these mixed relationships. The final straw came 2 weeks before the baptism. I'd been working late in my home office, Emma sleeping in her bassinet beside my desk, when I heard Margaret's voice through the baby monitor I'd accidentally left on in the kitchen. She was talking to David's sister Linda. "I'm telling you, that baby isn't David's," Margaret hissed. "Look at her. She's too dark, her features are all wrong. Sarah probably got pregnant before she even met David and trapped him." "Mom, that's a terrible thing to say," Linda replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Mark my words," Margaret continued, "this whole marriage is built on lies. That woman has been playing the long game, and my poor son is too trusting to see it." I sat in my office, my hands shaking with rage, and made a decision that would change everything. If Margaret wanted to question genetics, I would give her a genetics lesson she'd never forget. That night, after David fell asleep, I went to work. Not on client cases but on the Williams family tree. I pulled every record I could find: birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data, immigration records, newspaper archives. I reached out to distant Williams relatives through genealogy forums, claiming I was helping David research his family history as a surprise. I ordered DNA test kits and convinced family members to participate by telling them I was creating a comprehensive family health history for Emma. What I discovered over the next 6 weeks made my blood run cold and gave me the ammunition I needed. The Williams family had secrets. Big ones. It started with Margaret's own birth certificate. According to family lore, she was born Margaret Rose Patterson in 1954 in Cleveland, Ohio, to Irish Catholic parents. But when I dug deeper, I found something interesting. There was no record of a Margaret Rose Patterson born in Cleveland in 1954. None. I expanded my search and found her, born Margaret Rose Patterson in Detroit, Michigan in 1952. 2 years earlier than she claimed, in a different city entirely. Why would someone lie about when and where they were born? Usually there's only one reason. They're hiding something from that time period. I kept digging. Margaret's mother, supposedly Dorothy Patterson, was listed on Margaret's birth certificate. But when I pulled Dorothy's marriage records, I found something fascinating. Dorothy Patterson had been married twice. First to a man named James Murphy in 1949, then to Robert Patterson in 1955. But Margaret was born in 1952, during the gap between marriages. This meant one of two things. Either Dorothy had an affair, or she was never actually married to Margaret's biological father. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell came when I tracked down James Murphy's military records. He'd been stationed at Fort Knox from 1950 to 1953, which would have made it impossible for him to be Margaret's father. So who was? I found the answer in an old Detroit newspaper archive. In 1951, Dorothy Patterson had been arrested for running an illegal boarding house, what they used to call a house of ill repute. The charges were dropped, but the court records were still there, buried in city archives. Dorothy had been involved with several men during that period, and when Margaret was born, there had been questions about paternity. But here's where it gets really interesting. I managed to track down one of Dorothy's neighbors from that time, a 93-year-old woman named Betty Morrison who was still sharp as a tack and living in a nursing home in Detroit. When I called her, pretending to be researching family history, she remembered Dorothy Patterson very well. "Oh, honey," Betty said, her voice crackling through the phone, "that woman was trouble. And that daughter of hers, Margaret, was always putting on airs, pretending to be something she wasn't. Dorothy used to say Margaret would reinvent herself completely once she got away from Detroit." Betty confirmed what I'd suspected. Margaret had not only changed her birth year but had completely fabricated her family's social standing. The Williams family that Margaret had married into was old Portland money. David's father's family had owned lumber mills since the 1890s. Margaret had landed herself a wealthy husband and spent 40 years pretending to be from a respectable Irish Catholic family instead of admitting her mother had run a boarding house of questionable reputation. But I wasn't done digging. The DNA results started coming back in mid-February, just 3 weeks before the baptism. I'd managed to get samples from David's paternal uncle, his 2 cousins, Margaret herself. I'd told her it was for Emma's health records, and several distant relatives I'd connected with online. The results were illuminating. First, I confirmed what I already knew. Emma was definitely David's daughter. Her DNA showed clear matches to the Williams paternal line, shutting down Margaret's nasty insinuations completely. But then I saw something that made me sit up straight in my chair. Margaret's DNA showed she was only 73% European, with significant African ancestry, about 18%, and some Native American markers. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with having diverse ancestry, but for someone who'd spent 40 years making racist comments about maintaining bloodlines and questioning my daughter's purity, this was deeply ironic. More importantly, Margaret's DNA didn't match the Irish Catholic lineage she claimed. Instead, it showed strong connections to families from Louisiana and Mississippi, families with complicated histories involving slavery and racial mixing in the antebellum South. I dug deeper into those DNA matches and found Margaret's real story. Her biological father wasn't Irish at all. He was a man named Thomas Boudreau, whose family had moved from Louisiana to Detroit during the Great Migration. Thomas was part of what historians call the gens de couleur libres, free people of color who often passed as white when they moved north. Many of their descendants had been passing for white for generations. Margaret wasn't just hiding her illegitimate birth. She was hiding her racial heritage. The woman who'd spent 6 years making snide comments about my Asian ancestry, who'd questioned my daughter's pure Williams bloodline, who'd whispered about mixed babies looking confused, was herself of mixed race and had been passing as white her entire adult life. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. But wait, there was more. When I cross-referenced Margaret's real family tree with historical records, I found something that made my hands shake as I printed out the documents. Thomas Boudreau, Margaret's biological father, had a daughter named Marie who'd stayed in Louisiana. Marie had children, and those children had children, and one of those great-grandchildren had uploaded their DNA to the same database I was using. His name was Marcus Williams. Not related to David's Williams family at all. Just a coincidence in names. And Marcus lived in Portland. In fact, Marcus Williams was a prominent civil rights attorney who'd been featured in several local news stories about racial justice. Margaret's own DNA connected her to a family of civil rights activists, the very people she'd spent her life looking down on. The baptism reception was the perfect opportunity. Margaret had insisted on hosting it at the country club where she'd been a member for 30 years, surrounded by all her society friends. She wanted to show off, to play the role of the perfect grandmother, while simultaneously undermining me at every opportunity. I'd prepared 2 envelopes. One contained Emma's DNA results, clearly showing her Williams heritage and putting to rest any questions about paternity. The other contained Margaret's complete family tree, including her real birth records, her mother's history, and most importantly, her DNA breakdown showing her African and Native American ancestry, along with documentation connecting her to the Boudreau family of Louisiana. I also had a third surprise. I'd contacted Marcus Williams, Margaret's distant cousin, and invited him to the reception. I'd told him I was a genealogist who discovered they were related. And would he like to meet his newly discovered family? He'd been delighted and agreed to come. Margaret had spent the first hour of the reception making subtle digs at me and Emma. Comments about how different Emma looked from the Williams family photos on display. Jokes about how genetics can be so unpredictable with mixed marriages. Each comment was designed to look innocent to outsiders while cutting me to the bone. That's when she made her fatal mistake. The loud comment about questioning Emma's paternity in front of everyone. I smiled and walked to the microphone that had been set up for toasts. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "I think this is the perfect time to share some exciting family news that everyone should hear." The room fell silent. David looked confused. Margaret's face went pale. As most of you know, I'm a professional genealogist and I've been working on a very special project, mapping the complete Williams family tree for Emma's baby book. I've made some absolutely fascinating discoveries about our family's heritage that I think everyone will find illuminating. I held up the first envelope. "Margaret, you've been so concerned about Emma's genetics, so I thought I'd start by sharing her DNA results with everyone." Margaret's mouth opened but no sound came out. "Emma is definitively a Williams," I announced, watching Margaret's face crumble. "Her DNA shows clear matches to the Williams paternal line going back 5 generations. There's absolutely no question about her parentage." Polite applause rippled through the room. David smiled, relief washing over his face. "But that's not the most interesting discovery I made," I continued, pulling out the second envelope. "You see, while I was researching family histories, I discovered some fascinating information about our extended family that I think everyone should know about." "Margaret," I said, looking directly at her, "I know you've always been proud of your Irish Catholic heritage, so I'm sure you'll be thrilled to learn about your real family history." Her face had gone from pale to gray. "It turns out your birth certificate had the wrong information on it. An easy mistake to make." Your real father wasn't Irish at all. His name was Thomas Boudreau, and he was from one of Louisiana's most interesting families, the gens de couleur libres, or free people of color. The room was dead silent now. I could hear the air conditioning humming. Your DNA results show that you're about 18% African American and have Native American ancestry as well. Isn't that wonderful? Emma isn't just getting diverse heritage from my side of the family, she's getting it from both sides. Margaret grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. In fact, I continued, I was so excited about this discovery that I reached out to some of your relatives who still live in the area. Margaret, I'd like you to meet your cousin Marcus Williams. He's a civil rights attorney here in Portland, and he's been so excited to connect with this branch of the family. I gestured toward the entrance, where Marcus stood with his wife and teenage daughter. He was a distinguished black man in his 50s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a warm smile. He waved at the room. Marcus has been researching the Boudreau family history for years, I said as he walked toward us. He brought copies of family photos and documents that trace your shared ancestry back to the 1800s. Isn't it amazing how genealogy can bring families together? Margaret made a strangled sound and sat down heavily in her chair. Oh, and Margaret, I said, my voice sweet as honey, I shared with Marcus some of the lovely things you've said about the importance of maintaining bloodlines and keeping families pure. He found those comments absolutely fascinating, given your shared heritage. Marcus reached our table and extended his hand to Margaret. Cousin Margaret, he said warmly, I can't tell you how excited I am to finally meet you. Sarah told me how much you love discussing family genetics and heritage. I brought some photos of our great-great-grandfather Thomas. You have his eyes. Margaret stared at his outstretched hand like it was a snake. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Margaret's society friends sat frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their lips, watching the woman who'd spent decades looking down on others discover she was exactly what she'd been disparaging. Margaret finally managed to whisper, I think there's been a mistake. Oh no, I said cheerfully, I triple-checked everything. DNA doesn't lie, Margaret. Unlike birth certificates, DNA tells the truth about who we really are. David was staring at his mother in shock. Linda had tears in her eyes. Whether from embarrassment or realization I couldn't tell. Sarah, David said quietly, what's going on? I turned to my husband, my voice gentle but firm. What's going on, David, is that your mother has spent 6 years attacking me, questioning our daughter's legitimacy, and making racist comments about mixed families, while hiding the fact that she herself is mixed race and has been passing as white for 40 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. She's questioned Emma's bloodline, suggested I'd trapped you with another man's baby, and made countless disparaging remarks about people of color. And it turns out she's been living a lie her entire adult life. That was 8 months ago. The fallout was immediate and complete. Margaret left the reception that day and hasn't spoken to David since. She moved to Arizona 2 weeks later, claiming she needed a change of scenery. The truth is she couldn't face the social consequences of her exposure. Her country club friends who'd tolerated her racism for decades suddenly found her persona grotesque in light of her hypocrisy. David was devastated at first, but as the weeks passed he began to see his mother's behavior through new eyes. He started remembering incidents from his childhood, comments about neighbors, reactions to his friends, things he'd dismissed as generational attitudes but now recognized as internalized self-hatred and projection. She taught me to be ashamed of parts of myself I didn't even know existed, he told me one night as we watched Emma sleep. How do you hate your own heritage that much? Marcus and his family, meanwhile, have become close friends. Emma now has a whole extended family she never knew about, cousins, aunts, uncles who are brilliant, accomplished, and loving. They've embraced her completely, and watching them with her has shown me what real family looks like. I never intended to destroy Margaret's life. I just wanted her to stop attacking mine. But when you build your entire identity on a lie, when you spend decades putting others down to make yourself feel superior, the truth becomes a weapon you've forged against yourself. Emma is now 11 months old and she's perfect. She has David's blue eyes and my dark hair, his stubborn chin and my curious nature. She's going to grow up knowing exactly who she is and where she comes from, all of it, the beautiful and the complicated alike. As for me, my genealogy business has tripled. Word got out about my investigative skills, and now I specialize in cases where families need uncomfortable truths uncovered. I've reunited adoptees with birth families, solved inheritance disputes, and yes, caught more than a few cheating spouses and exposed family frauds. The lesson I learned is simple. Be very careful when you attack someone's family, especially when you're hiding secrets about your own. DNA doesn't lie, documents don't lie, and the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Margaret wanted to question genetics? She got her answer. Just not the one she was hoping for.